if I can give some pushback, I would say that like the person that has the miserable marriage and unhappy kids, but is still seemingly happy, that person is insane to me. The person that has unhappy kids in an unhappy marriage and is unhappy is sane.
Yes, that's exactly that's exactly the point I'm making is that, because the thing is that if you aren't reflecting the structure of the social communities around you, then you're off calibration. Yes. Well, here, I was talking to a woman named Jean Twenge yesterday, and she's a research psychologist. We were talking about self-esteem. And one of the self-esteem movement in the school system in California was absolutely dreadfully devastating and appalling. It basically posited that you could teach kids how to be narcissistic to overcome their negative emotion and neuroticism. And that's so preposterously appalling that you couldn't invent something stupider. So we were talking about self-esteem, whatever the hell that means, because it's a very badly defined term. But here's one way of determining whether you have the appropriate amount of self-esteem. You might say, well, everyone should feel good about themselves. It's like, well, if you're a miserable, ratty, lying, deceptive, narcissistic prick, then probably you shouldn't feel that good about yourself. And how do you know that? Because you should feel about as good about yourself as people on average do around you about you, right? Yes. So and we even know this technically because you have a little counter, so to speak, in your psyche that ranks you in terms of your social standing. And the higher you're ranked, the less negative emotion you feel and the more positive emotion you feel. And that's because your brain is indicating to you that you're well situated in a social community and you're secure with opportunity. And so your self-esteem that's exactly how it works. It's a very, so what happens to people who get depressed, technically depressed, is that that counter goes astray and they start thinking less of themselves than their situation would indicate. And so then everything around them falls apart. They feel that their past was a catastrophe. They feel that their present is hopeless and that the future isn't going anywhere. But it's because this really, really low-level counter that utilizes serotonin has gone astray. And sometimes antidepressants can help deal with that. Now, that isn't someone who has a terrible life. That's someone who has a good life, but something's gone wrong with them psychophysiologically often, so the counter is out of whack. In any case, you should have about as much self-esteem as other people are willing to grant you. And that's kind of a conservative idea as well, in some real sense.
Enough self-esteem as others are willing to grant you.
Well, imagine, if everybody in the company assumes that you're an average performer, you should probably assume that you're an average performer. You shouldn't be running around feeling good about yourself in excess of that, because your attitude towards yourself should be a reflection of your actual situation in the social environment.
So my pushback on that would be, if your self-esteem is defined by how the people around you treat you, how can you break out when you're in especially when you're in an industry of narcissists that are really only concerned with how they're doing, what they want. How do you separate yourself?
That's a great question, man. And that's the trick that presents itself to everyone creative.
But the answer maybe is, and this is, I don't know if we support this, but this might be the truth. There is a reason why narcissists tend to break out, because their self-esteem is not limited by the views of others.
That is true. That is exactly true. Well, in fact, in that regard, so you put your finger on something that's cardinally important, because it is generally the case that your view of yourself should reflect the views of those around you. But the problem with that is now and then the social situation gets so pathological that that's no longer reliable. Now, when that happens, you're really in trouble. That's the first thing we should point out, because if society has got so demented that its feedback can no longer be trusted, then everything's going to hell in a handbasket pretty quickly. But that is when you get the necessity for people to call on whatever it is within them that makes them true moral agents to, let's say what they believe to be true with great caution. But I would say even in those circumstances, like I've been fortunate when I've been doing that to the degree I've been able to do that, because I have friends around me who are giving me accurate feedback, I would say, and careful feedback, despite the mob pressure. I don't know if anybody could really do that alone. You know what I mean? Maybe you could.
Yeah, 100%. And 100%. I just know, and I'm sure you felt this as well, is that like, at least when I'm running my business and I have my friends and the guys that I work with and build with, I personally feel most creative when I have support, right? So when there is a momentum, when the ball is moving, when there's an avalanche, that's when these explosions of creativity happen to me in a conversation. When I'm talking to someone or other people who value what I have to say, all of a sudden I have tons to say. I'm excited to share. When I'm talking to someone who thinks that I'm an idiot, I'm questioning the things that I have to say. So in my mind, I'm trying to foster an environment where everybody here feels the confidence to access their genius, right? Now, if their genius in one zone is a 6, that's fine. If their genius in another zone is a 10, that's fine. But let me get the best version of you. Now, that's not saying we're buttering people up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're not treating it like, I don't know, I think like creativity is not a football field, right? Where it's like you can only run as fast as you can run. I can yell at a player, he's still gonna run a 40 in 5 seconds. I can say he sucks, he's gonna run a 40 in 5 seconds. I can say he's great, he's gonna run a 40 in 5 seconds. But with somebody who's coming up with like a creative idea, a funny idea, the more I build his confidence up, the more willing he is to go into those deep, weird concepts that might produce something incredibly creative.
Yeah. Well, you do a lot of that by listening and attending, right? And
yes.
And yeah, because people will manifest themselves more fully in precise proportion to the degree that they're being attended to and listened to. I was thinking too about the calibration issue. You know, one of the values of a real education is that you start to spread the community that you identify with over vast spans of time. So, you know, in the humanities in particular, at least in principle, there was a golden thread of conversation that's been going on at least from the time of Socrates between great minds moving forward that have been adjudicated as great by the consensus of the entire educated community, let's say. And now that's all, of course, parodied as patriarchal oppression, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. And then maybe when you're called upon to speak carefully and truthfully, despite mob pressure and despite your otherwise laudable willingness to abide by the judgment of the group starts to expand across time. And so the pathologies of the moment can be ignored in favor of the, what would you call it, the wisdom of the group stretching across thousands and thousands of years. And you see, that's also, in some sense, a conservative idea in the deepest sense, because the idea would be that there is a fundamental spiritual tradition that manifests itself philosophically and theologically that has to be attended to despite the vagaries of the moment. And so, and that seems to be right. You know, I mean, I think what you do if you go to university and you get a real education, you find a peer group, the peer group of creative and truthful thinkers, and their thought in some sense exists outside of time, right? It's eternally valuable. And it doesn't matter what the situation is. And then you can judge your actions in the moment against those standards.
Yeah, but you're still picking the people whose standards most resemble yours.
Well, not necessarily. Not if you're really getting educated, you know, because then you get exposed to a lot of people who didn't necessarily think the way you thought.
Well, this is why it's so important. It's like, and this is why the internet is amazing, but also dangerous. It's just like university in this way. Okay, before the internet, there was college. And that's how I described it. In high school, you talk to some people that had rough experiences in high school, especially people who are younger than me. And I said, hey, just wait till you go to college. You're going to be dealing with way more people and you'll be able to be yourself because there's some other people that actually feel just like you. Right? And you're going to really like this college experience because you're going to find a friend group that just didn't exist in your small 100 kid per grade high school. Right? The internet is that on steroids, right? Now that little 4-person group that really likes gaming and wearing masks and doing all this other shit is 4 million globally. You get to feel part of a big group, and you have all these people that like what you have to say. But what I think that the internet can often do, and it's something that like I try my hardest to not let it do, is it dulls our sword. You know, what we don't have to communicate outside of the echo chamber. Right? We know if we want, we can say the things we believe to the people who also believe them. And now there's no more nuance. One of the great things about getting on stage and doing stand-up comedy show when people don't know I'm going to be there, right? I've been very fortunate to go and sell out in the biggest theaters in the country, right? This has been awesome. But one of the really cool things about going up to a show where people don't know I'm going to be there is there are people who may disagree with me, hate me, not know me, and also love me all in the same room. And it keeps my tongue sharp. I have to communicate to those people ideas that they might disagree with in a way that's funny enough for them to listen and then project laughter. I fear, and I sometimes fear that like you've experienced so much fucking undeserved hate from the left that it's positioned you as with some resentment, which is reasonable. I don't know how you're even still having like the common debate and discourse. Like if most people in your situation, they would just say, F them, screw them, whatever. But your information is more important to the people who don't agree with you than the ones who already agree. You know what I'm saying? Like explaining the value of, let's say, God. I'm not someone who was raised with religion, but I believe in the power of it. And so explaining the power of God to someone who is not religious is more important than to the believer. Because if that person can get something from it, it's so powerful. But if you've only ever explained it to your congregation, you're not going to be able to communicate it to me or another person or a person who is maybe there's even an atheist. There's no way they're going to be able to digest it.